The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, alien voices crackling through different frequencies. In the dim glow of the chamber, members of the Galactic Federation gathered in their usual fashion, dozens of species, all staring down at their holographic displays. They sat in floating seats, scattered across the vast circular space. At the center, a spinning orb projected live images of a distant battlefield, two fleets locked in a brutal, silent exchange of fire. Energy pulses ripped through space, leaving destruction in their wake. Another skirmish, rasped the Zeon delegate, her leathery skin twitching in agitation. The Bree Sax and the Elder have violated our peace accords again. This must be addressed. There were nods and low grunts of agreement, but the tension in the room was palpable. Some species, reptilian or insect, blinked multiple eyes in agitation, while others sat stoic, waiting to hear how the Council would address yet another planetary conflict. The Galactic Federation prided itself on maintaining order, yet cracks were beginning to show. The Chancellor, a translucent being with flowing energy streams running across their body, raised a hand. "We will send mediators," they declared, their voice radiating in every direction at once. "Our priority remains the preservation of peace." "But this time is different," interrupted a new voice. The delegate was fresh to the Council, a young ambassador from a planet that had recently gained membership. His species was mammalian, bearing some resemblance to humans, though with darker, smoother skin and elongated limbs. His eyes, bright with curiosity, flicked nervously around the room. "Why not let them fight? Why intervene? We impose peace, yet we uphold certain laws with no explanation." All eyes turned toward him, the weight of centuries falling upon his shoulders. It was a question not often voiced. "What are you suggesting?" asked a towering garlic, voice thick with warning. The young ambassador hesitated, swallowing. "It's just this law," he said, words trembling. "The one about humans. They remain untouchable, immune from conflict, from retribution. Why? No one has ever explained it, yet we all follow it. I only ask." "Enough!" barked the Chancellor, their voice resonating like a tremor through the floor. "The law of untouchability is not for debate. It is as old as time itself, older than this Council. To question it is to invite chaos. It must remain in place." There was silence. The younger ambassador sat back, cowed but unsatisfied. The room resumed its focus, but a seed had been planted. Not everyone in that room was content with silence anymore. Outside the council chambers, amidst the crowded halls of the Federation's Grand Station, a solitary figure moved through the throngs. Standing taller than most species, they cut an imposing silhouette. Their armor, dented and scarred from countless battles, caught the faint light. A large blaster hung at their side, and their pale, taut skin was marked with symbols of a warrior caste. The bounty hunter. Luth was not known for patience, nor for abiding by rules. Her people, the Drogan, were bred for conflict, warriors to the bone. She had served in more wars than she could count, seen planets rise and fall under her gun, yet there was one thing that irked her more than anything: the humans. Untouchable. Unharmed. Protected. She couldn't understand it, and the more she thought about it, the more it gnawed at her. For centuries, they had existed on the fringes of the galactic map, small in number but always present. No one dared approach them, let alone attack them. It was as though they were ghosts, immune to the realities that plagued everyone else in the galaxy. Why? It had become an obsession. Luth had spent months studying them from afar, watching how they moved, how they interacted with the galaxy. They weren't special, at least not to the naked eye. Fragile, weak compared to other species. Easy targets. And yet the law persisted. She had once tried to pry answers from an elder in her tribe, a veteran of countless battles. He had only shaken his head, muttering about ancient covenants, things older than her or her ancestors. But that wasn't good enough. Not for Luth. She wanted answers, and if no one was going to provide them, she would find them herself. The council chambers weren't far from where she stood now, and as she watched the delegates leave, her eyes narrowed on one figure in particular. the young ambassador who had dared question the law. He was a fool, she thought, but at least he was asking the right questions. Luth turned and made her way back to her ship, her mind buzzing with possibilities. Her contact, a smuggler who frequented the human-inhabited sectors, had offered her a new job. It was the perfect cover, an escort mission deep into human territory. No one would suspect anything. Not yet. Once on board her ship, Luth reviewed the details of the mission. A cargo run, simple enough, but it would take her close to a human colony. From there, she would begin her investigation. She knew it was a risk. Violating the law had severe consequences, and even a Drogan warrior would be hard-pressed to survive the wrath of the Federation if caught. But curiosity had always been her driving force. Luth was no stranger to danger, and this, she felt, was worth it. The humans had remained untouchable for far too long. If she could unravel the mystery behind the law, perhaps she could turn it to her advantage. Maybe she could find a weakness no one else had seen. As her ship's engines roared to life, Luth allowed herself a rare smile. The galaxy's rules had always bent for those willing to test them. It was time to find out just how far she could go. And if the answers she sought lay in breaking the untouchable law, then so be it. The stars streaked by her cockpit window as the ship entered hyperspace. Somewhere out there, the humans remained untouched. For now. The Galactic Federation archives were supposed to be a treasure trove of knowledge, containing the entire recorded history of every known species. Yet as Luth sifted through the data, frustration mounted. The files on humanity were frustratingly thin, no historical records of battles, no details of conflicts, just empty timelines and censored reports. Anything remotely connected to humans was locked behind layers of encryption, protected by permissions even she couldn't access. Luth's eyes narrowed as she pulled up an old map, scanning for anything unusual. The human territories were marked clearly, but they were almost always located in the least strategic positions. There was nothing about them that should warrant this level of protection, no reason why the Federation treated them as something sacred. Every inquiry led to dead ends, files marked, classified, or redacted beyond recognition. Someone wanted to keep humanity's history hidden, and Luth wasn't naive enough to believe it was for the sake of peace. There was something here, something big. She downloaded what little she could before heading out, her mind already racing toward the next step of her investigation. If the archives were useless, perhaps someone who had been in the field, someone who had seen the humans up close, would have the answers she needed. The veteran general sat hunched over, the weight of years etched into every scar across his leathery skin. His breathing was heavy, his eyes clouded, but the moment Luth mentioned humanity, a shift came over him, a sudden tension, a shadow of something long buried. "I don't talk about them," he said, his voice hoarse. Luth leaned forward, her tone firm. "You fought in the last attempt to break the untouchable law. I need to know what happened." The general stared at her, a flicker of something, fear, passing through his eyes. "There are some things you don't want to understand, Drogan. What I saw, it wasn't war. It wasn't even a battle." Luth's jaw tightened, frustration building. "Then what was it?" He said nothing for a long time, his gaze distant, as if lost in a memory too painful to recall. Finally, he muttered, "A nightmare. Beyond imagination." Luth wasn't interested in vague warnings. "You're not giving me anything." The general's hand twitched, gripping the armrest of his chair. "You think you can defy the law and come out unscathed? Those who tried before us, our entire fleet, was wiped out in an instant. No weapons. No battle formations. Just gone. I lost everyone. Don't look for reasons, Drogan. There aren't any. Only death." Luth pressed harder, but the general had already shut down, his eyes dead to the world. There was no more to be gleaned here. As she left, his final words lingered. "You won't survive them." The warning did little to deter her, but it did deepen the mystery. What could wipe out an entire fleet without a trace? What were these humans hiding? The planet of Cala Prime was bustling with activity as Luth disembarked. It was one of the few places where humans and aliens lived side by side, a fragile peace maintained by trade and diplomacy. Luth blended into the crowd, her eyes sharp for any sign of the emissary she had heard about. It didn't take long. In the center of a grand hall, two delegations, one from the reptilian Shoker and another from the insectid Enwyan, faced off, their body language tense. The two species had been at each other's throats for generations, yet now they stood silently before a lone figure in human robes. The human emissary, tall and composed, radiated an unnatural calm. Every movement was measured, every word spoken with precision, as if the situation was already under their control before they even began speaking. Luth watched closely, noting how the alien representatives seemed unnaturally subdued in the emissary's presence. The Shoker were known for their fiery temperaments, but here they stood, as if trapped in a trance. The humans spoke, their voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the hall with an unsettling authority. There is no need for conflict. You both stand to lose more than you can gain from war. The Shoker representative, whose kind would normally hiss and spit at such a suggestion, merely nodded. The Enwyan delegate clicked its mandibles in what seemed to be reluctant agreement. Within moments, the two factions agreed to terms of peace, just like that. No debate, no negotiation, no threats. The tension evaporated, leaving only the strange, lingering stillness that followed the human's words. Luth watched, disturbed. There was something unnatural about the way the human commanded the room. It wasn't just diplomacy. There was a power in their presence, a force that bent others to their will without them even realizing it. Was this part of the reason humans were untouchable? Did they possess some ability beyond simple negotiation? After the gathering dispersed, Luth followed the emissary at a distance. She needed answers, and this human seemed to hold more than anyone else she'd encountered. But the closer she got, the more unease crept up her spine. The emissary moved with grace, but there was something off, something too perfect, too calculated in their every step. Luth approached cautiously, blending into the shadows as the emissary passed through the quiet streets. She felt the weight of their presence even before they turned to look at her, their eyes locking with hers as if they had known she was following all along. You seek answers, the emissary said, their voice calm, yet laced with an unspoken warning. Luth's hand instinctively moved toward her weapon. I want to know why no one can touch you. The emissary smiled, a cold and distant smile that didn't reach their eyes. Some laws are not meant to be broken, bounty hunter. To defy them is to invite ruin upon yourself. Luth's grip tightened on her blaster. I'm not afraid of a little ruin. The emissary's gaze held hers for a moment longer, before they turned and walked away, their parting words hanging in the air like a threat. You should be. Luth stood frozen, her mind racing. She had seen battles, endured wars, but there was something about this encounter that left her feeling small, like a child playing with forces far beyond her understanding. The mystery deepened, and the danger became real. Yet the questions only multiplied. What were these humans truly capable of? And why did the galaxy fear them so? The cold silence of the abandoned research station hung like a shroud as Luth made her way through the dimly lit corridors. It had been decades since anyone had set foot in this place, long enough for dust and debris to cover the consoles and walls, erasing nearly all traces of the life that once buzzed here. But this was where it had happened, the last place any record of the doomed fleet existed. If there were answers to be found, they were buried in this forgotten station. Luth approached the central command room, the door groaning open. Terminals lined the walls, many of them flickering with static as power barely ran through the systems. She connected her data pad to the main console, her fingers moving quickly as she bypassed security protocols. If the Federation had left anything behind, it would be here. As the data loaded, she searched for fleet logs from the last recorded mission. Files flashed across her screen, heavily redacted and fragmented. It wasn't surprising. The details of what had happened to the fleet were buried so deeply that few even knew the mission existed. But one name stood out, Operation Harvest. Luth's eyes narrowed. She hadn't seen that name in any other records, but it seemed to be the key to understanding what had happened. She opened the files, each one encrypted and labeled with warnings about restricted access. Whoever tried to hide these files didn't want anyone to learn what had transpired. But Luth wasn't deterred. One by one, the files began to unlock. There were logs from the fleet's departure. Everything seemed normal at first. The mission had been simple, a preemptive strike against Earth to test the limits of the untouchable law. There had been confidence, even arrogance, among the fleet commanders. They believed that if they moved quickly and with overwhelming force, they could bypass whatever protections humans had. They would prove that no law was absolute. But the reports ended abruptly. No signs of battle, no distress signals. Just silence. Luth scrolled further, finding one last, heavily encrypted file. It took her longer to crack this one, but when she did, a hollow recording blinked to life. The projection was grainy and incomplete, but the essence of the event was clear. The recording showed the fleet, a vast armada of warships, moving through space toward Earth. There was no resistance, no sign of human defenses. Everything seemed calm. Then, without warning, the feed distorted. The stars stretched, bending in ways that defied logic. It wasn't a weapon, not in the conventional sense. It was something else, a shift in reality itself. The ships began to disappear, one by one, consumed by an invisible force. No explosions, no fire. They simply blinked out of existence. The feed cut to black. When it resumed, there was nothing left. The entire fleet was gone. Luth stood motionless, her mind racing. It hadn't been a battle, there was no confrontation. The fleet had been erased, as if it had never existed at all. She replayed the recording, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. There were no energy signatures, no weaponized force fields. Just nothing. The ripple in space and time, as the files described it, had consumed everything in its path. And it hadn't come from the humans. The recording's final notes suggested that something far older and more powerful had intervened. The words, "non-human anomaly," appeared several times, always followed by a warning to cease further investigation. Luth's breath caught in her throat. Whatever was protecting humanity, it wasn't human. The galaxy had always assumed that humans were left untouched because of some advanced technology, a hidden defense system. But this was something far worse. It wasn't that humans were invincible. It was that something else made sure they were never harmed. The files continued, detailing the aftermath. Entire sections were censored, but one chilling phrase stood out. The Ripple event has been deemed an existential threat to the galaxy. All attempts to understand it had been abandoned, and the Federation had instead chosen to enforce the untouchable law, hoping to avoid provoking the Force again. No one dared mention what had truly happened. Luth leaned back, trying to process the magnitude of her discovery. Humanity wasn't just untouchable. They were protected by something beyond comprehension, an entity or force that defied the laws of physics, of space and time. Whatever had annihilated that fleet could do the same to any species that threatened the humans. Her hands clenched. She had come here searching for answers, driven by curiosity and the hope that she could exploit whatever secret lay behind humanity's untouchable status. But now, standing in the shadow of this incomprehensible power, all she felt was dread. What she had uncovered wasn't a secret to be used, it was a warning. As she scrolled through the remaining data, she found more references to the Ripple event, each more cryptic than the last. Some described it as a cosmic defense mechanism, others as a living anomaly, but none of them dared to speculate on its true nature. Luth's mind raced through possibilities. Could this force be reasoned with? Controlled? Or was it something that simply existed beyond their understanding, protecting the humans for reasons no one could ever know? The thought that the galaxy's most feared law wasn't built on human power, but on something unknowable, chilled her to the core. The final file revealed the full extent of the cover-up. The Federation had chosen silence over chaos, erasing any mention of the fleet's destruction and sealing away all evidence. They had known all along, known that the Ripple event couldn't be stopped, known that the law wasn't just about humans, but about avoiding the wrath of something greater. Luth disconnected from the terminal, her heart pounding. She had her answer, but it wasn't the one she had expected. The humans weren't to be feared. It was what lay behind them, in the dark, that was truly terrifying. As she made her way back to her ship, Luth felt the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. The galaxy's greatest mystery had been solved, but the cost of that knowledge was heavy. Now, she had to decide what to do with it. Could anyone even comprehend the truth? Would they believe her? Or would they fall into the same silence that had consumed the Federation for centuries? One thing was certain: the bounty she had sought wasn't about humans anymore. It was about surviving the forbidden truth that shielded them. Luth sat alone in her ship, the quiet hum of the engines her only companion. The weight of her discovery gnawed at her mind, twisting her thoughts in endless circles. She had uncovered the truth, the terrible, incomprehensible truth behind humanity's untouchable status. Yet now, with that knowledge, came a dilemma she couldn't shake. The bounty on the human ambassador was lucrative, a prize that would establish her name in every corner of the galaxy. To defy the untouchable law would make her infamous, perhaps even a legend. She had spent her life chasing danger, seeking the edge where few dared to go. But this was different. This wasn't just a contract, it was a test of limits, a challenge to something ancient and unstoppable. Her fingers tapped rhythmically on the console as her mind wandered. If she succeeded, if she breached the law and lived to tell the tale, it would change everything. She could rewrite the rules of the galaxy, expose the Federation's lies, and stand as the first to defy the ripple that erased fleets. But if she failed, her name would be erased from existence as thoroughly as that doomed armada. There would be no glory, no legacy. Just oblivion. Her thoughts turned to the mercenaries she had gathered, seasoned fighters, thrill-seekers, and those foolish enough to believe in her plan. They had no idea what they were getting into. For them, it was a payday, nothing more. They didn't have the same knowledge she carried. They couldn't feel the creeping dread that came with it. Still, they were willing to follow her. She had laid out the plan in simple terms: abduct the human ambassador from the outer colony of Solera V, a small world on the fringe of human space. The security there would be light, and the ambassador was one of the most important diplomats in the sector. If anyone would provoke a response from the mysterious force protecting humanity, it would be him. But as the preparations moved forward, doubts began to claw at her. Was this really about power? Or was it a deeper need to understand what she had seen? Was her obsession with humans born out of ambition or fear? The question lingered, refusing to settle into any easy answer. Luth leaned back, staring at the ceiling of her ship. The law wasn't just a restriction, it was a shield that had held the galaxy in place for centuries. If she broke it, if she triggered something even the Federation feared, what would the consequences be? Would it plunge the galaxy into chaos? Would others follow her lead, challenging the unknown forces that had protected humanity for so long? Yet, despite the risks, she couldn't turn back. The truth was too close, just beyond the horizon of this mission. There was no guarantee that she would survive, but there was a chance, however small, that she could succeed. That chance gnawed at her, calling her forward. The day of the mission came quickly, too quickly for Luth's liking. Her crew gathered in the ship's war room, their faces eager, unaware of the gravity of what they were about to do. She stood at the center, watching them, wondering if they understood the risk they were taking. "This is a clean job," she said, her voice steady. "We go in, we grab the ambassador, and we get out before anyone knows we were there. No firefights. No complications." Her second-in-command, a hulking brute named Crawl, grinned. "You make it sound easy. Humans aren't even allowed to defend themselves. What's there to worry about?" Luth didn't respond immediately, her eyes narrowing. Crawl didn't know. None of them did. The law was more than just a rule. It was a barrier between them and something far more dangerous. But she couldn't explain that without sounding like a fool. They wouldn't believe her, and maybe they didn't need to. "You're right," she said finally, forcing a smirk. "But stay sharp. Anything could happen. The crew laughed, their confidence palpable, and Luth turned away, her mind elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them, something they couldn't see or understand. But there was no turning back now. The colony of Solera V was quiet, its artificial cities nestled between barren valleys and dust-covered plains. Luth and her crew moved quickly through the empty streets, their stealth gear rendering them nearly invisible in the night. They made their way toward the ambassador's residence, a modest structure on the outskirts of the city. So far, everything had gone according to plan. The few security patrols they encountered were easily avoided, and the ambassador's movements were well documented. He kept a small staff, none of them armed. It was too easy, almost suspiciously so. As they approached the residence, Luth's unease deepened. The air felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't explain. Her crew was oblivious, focused on the mission, but Luth's senses screamed at her to be careful. They breached the outer perimeter with ease, slipping into the residence's lower levels. The ambassador was exactly where they expected him to be, sleeping in his quarters, vulnerable, unguarded. Kral moved toward the ambassador, his restraint cuffs in hand. "See? Just like I said. Easy." But Luth's gut told her something was wrong. She could feel it in the stillness of the air, in the way the shadows seemed to stretch too far. "Wait," she said, her voice low. Kral hesitated, his hand hovering over the ambassador's shoulder. "What is it?" Luth scanned the room, her eyes narrowing. There was no sign of anything out of place, yet the sense of impending danger weighed down on her like a physical force. She couldn't explain it, but every instinct screamed at her to stop. "We need to." Before she could finish, a wave of disorientation hit her, a ripple through the air that seemed to distort the space around them. Kral froze, his eyes wide, as the room twisted and blurred. Luth's heart pounded. She recognized this feeling. It was the same distortion she had seen in the hollow recording, the same ripple that had wiped out the fleet. They had triggered it. The force protecting humanity had awakened. Luth shouted orders, but the words came out distorted, lost in the growing hum of the air. Her crew scrambled, panicked, as reality itself seemed to buckle under the weight of the unseen force. She had done it. She had broken the law. And now, whatever had erased the fleet was coming for them. In that moment, Luth realized the full weight of her actions. This was no longer about power or glory. It was survival, hers and her crew's. The law had been more than a restriction, it had been a warning. One she had foolishly ignored. Now, it was too late. Luth's pulse raced as the air around her warped. Time itself seemed to twist, the walls bending inward as if reality was being pulled into a vortex. Her crew was frozen in place, their eyes wide with fear, unable to comprehend what was happening. The human ambassador lay motionless, untouched, but Luth could feel it, the ripple, the force that had wiped out the fleet centuries ago, was here. The room buzzed with a low hum, growing louder, resonating in her bones. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was more like an overwhelming sensation pressing down on her, as if the universe itself was pushing back against her actions. Her hands trembled, and she struggled to maintain control. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. Kral tried to move, his body jerking as if he could break free of the invisible grip holding him, but his efforts were in vain. His voice, thick with panic, barely managed to escape his throat. "What is this?" Luth couldn't answer. She had no words. She had seen this before in the hollow recording, this moment, right before the fleet had vanished. But seeing it in person, feeling the force tear at the fabric of reality, was far worse than she had imagined. It was no longer a mystery she was chasing. It was the end of everything if she made the wrong move. The ambassador, still unconscious, remained untouched, a beacon of calm in the chaos. It wasn't the human she feared anymore. It was whatever had been awakened by their actions. She could feel its presence, vast, ancient, and beyond anything the galaxy could comprehend. It wasn't angry, nor did it seem cruel. It was indifferent, as if Luth and her crew were insignificant compared to the force that now surrounded them. Her heart pounded harder as the hum escalated, growing into a roar inside her head. She dropped to her knees, clutching her temples, fighting to stay conscious. Her vision blurred, the edges of her reality cracking and splitting like a broken mirror. She knew, in that moment, that she had made a terrible mistake. The untouchable law wasn't just a rule. It was a boundary they were never meant to cross. The force was everywhere now, pressing in on all sides. Her mind struggled to grasp it, but the more she tried, the more it slipped away, too vast for her limited perception. She had never felt so small, so helpless. It wasn't an enemy she could fight. It was something beyond existence itself. And then, suddenly, the pressure lifted, but not completely. Time seemed to slow, the air becoming thick and heavy. The force hadn't left, it was simply holding them in place, waiting. The hum in her head softened, shifting into something more deliberate. It wasn't speaking, not in words, but the message was unmistakable. You do not belong here. Luth gasped, the meaning clear, though no voice had spoken. It wasn't a command, it was a warning. This force had no interest in them, no reason to care, but it would act if they crossed the line again. Leave. The sensation grew sharper, more insistent. Her vision swam, and for a moment she felt as though she was staring into the void itself, a dark expanse of nothingness where the laws of the universe ceased to exist. She was on the edge of that void now, and one wrong move would send her plummeting into it, lost forever. With every ounce of strength left in her, she forced herself to her feet. Her crew remained paralyzed, their faces twisted in fear, but Luth managed a single step toward the door. The pressure around her eased slightly, as if the force was watching, waiting for her to make her decision. Her gaze flickered to the ambassador, still lying peacefully on the floor. It would be so easy to complete the mission, to take him and escape, to prove that the law could be broken. But she knew now that wasn't possible. The ripple, the force, wasn't something she could fight. It wasn't something anyone could fight. She took another step back. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't untouchable because they were powerful, but because something far more dangerous protected them. This was no act of mercy. It was a deterrent, a warning to the galaxy: leave humans alone, or face total destruction. The crew began to stir, slowly regaining control of their bodies, though their expressions remained filled with terror. Krall looked at her, his face pale. We need to go. Now. Luth nodded. There was no argument, no hesitation. The mission was over. She had challenged the untouchable law, and in doing so, had come face to face with the unimaginable. She had gotten her answer, but at what cost? As they fled the residence, the sensation of the force faded, but it never fully disappeared. It lingered on the edge of perception, a reminder of how close they had come to something far worse than death. Luth could still feel its presence, watching, waiting. Back on her ship, the silence was oppressive. The crew huddled in the common area, shaken and confused, but no one spoke. They didn't need to. What they had just experienced defied explanation, and none of them wanted to revisit it. Luth sat alone in the cockpit, her eyes unfocused as she stared at the stars outside. She had risked everything, and for what? The truth? A bounty? None of it seemed to matter anymore. All that remained was the cold, undeniable reality. Humanity's untouchable status wasn't a privilege, it was a curse on the galaxy. To challenge it was to face forces far beyond mortal understanding. She had been spared, but the message was clear. She would never make the same mistake again. No one would. As the ship drifted into the void, Luth's mind raced with fragmented thoughts. She had chased the unknown, hoping to unravel the galaxy's greatest mystery. Now, she wished she had never found the answers. The bounty was lost, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was survival. What mattered was understanding that some laws weren't meant to be broken. And above all, what mattered was knowing when to walk away. For the first time in her life, Luth was glad to be insignificant. As the stars stretched out before her, she knew one thing for certain: she would never challenge the law again.